She spray-painted Eyesore across his grandfather's hand-built log cabin, trying to erase nearly a century of heritage with one act of spite. Janet Langley, the self-appointed HOA queen, thought her fake authority gave her the final word. But Zane had something stronger than power. He had proof, and a cousin in the state office of historic preservation. Just wait until you hear how a smear of red paint turned into a permanent mark of justice. Zane Wexler had spent the better part of 5 years breathing life back into what everyone else had written off as a forgotten skeleton in the woods. The old log cabin, nestled between ponderosa pines on a rocky slope above the valley, wasn't just a house. It was the last standing piece of his grandfather's legacy. His childhood summers were carved into those hand-hewn beams. He still remembered the way the old man whistled while restoring the chimney stone by stone after a lightning strike in '76, or how his grandmother used to hang bundles of drying herbs along the porch rafters. It was more than a structure. It was memory, marrow, and meaning. Every weekend, Zane had made the winding drive up from Denver. He stripped and resealed every log by hand. He restored the antique lanterns and rewired them for modern safety. He cleaned out mouse nests from between the floorboards and replaced the cracked slate of the hearthstone with slabs he hauled in himself. He'd done it alone, without loans, without a GoFundMe, without asking anyone's opinion, especially not the subdivision that had crept up the ridge like an architectural virus. Rows of beige, 2 stories with vinyl siding, and zero imagination. Zane's parcel was older than all of them. The deed predated the HOA by 70 years. Legally, he didn't owe them anything. But try telling that to Janet Langley. She arrived like fog on a cold morning, sudden, self-important, and hard to ignore. Zane found her standing at the edge of his drive one Tuesday morning, clipboard clutched like a weapon. Dressed in an HOA polo shirt she clearly had custom embroidered with her name. He didn't invite her in. She didn't ask. She eyed the log exterior like it personally offended her. "You're technically within the HOA visual perimeter," she began without greeting, "and your structure violates a dozen aesthetic conformity guidelines: unfinished wood, exposed chimney, irregular facade lines. We've had complaints." Zane blinked at her. "This cabin's been here since 1932. "That's irrelevant," she snapped, flipping a page on her clipboard. "We're trying to maintain a visual standard for the community. We've worked hard to create a harmonious palette." He gave her the politest non-answer he could manage. "This is private land. I'm not part of your HOA." Her mouth twitched into something that was definitely not a smile. "We'll see." She left without another word. Zane figured that was the end of it. He'd dealt with boundary pushers before. Let them rattle their clipboards and file their toothless complaints. The cabin wasn't going anywhere. But the next morning, the world changed. He stepped outside to the familiar creak of the front door and the cool bite of mountain air. The sunlight hit the front wall of the cabin, and his stomach dropped. Across the logs, in jagged, hateful letters 6 feet wide, someone had sprayed the word eyesore. The red paint bled into the wood grain like an open wound. It dripped between logs, trailing like blood over bark. Below the word, almost like a signature on a painting, was a scrawl he recognized instantly: J. Langley. For a moment, Zane didn't move. His coffee sloshed in his mug, untouched. The wind through the trees sounded different, too quiet. The smell of pine and old timber couldn't cover the sharp bite of chemical paint. He wasn't angry yet. Not yet. He was just stunned, like someone had sucker-punched his soul and walked away. Neighbors drove past and didn't stop. A few stared. One even took a photo. But no one said a word. That silence rang louder than anything. And as Zane stared at the damage, his breath slow and shallow, one thing became absolutely, blindingly clear. This wasn't about aesthetics. It was about power. And Janet Langley had just declared war. Zane didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a scene. He didn't give the neighbors the outburst they were waiting for, the one they could point at and say, "See, that's why he doesn't belong here." Instead, he just stood there, Hands curled into fists, jaw set so tight it ached, Zane stood barefoot in the gravel, the word Eyesore bleeding down the cabin's front wall like a slap to his family's name. The red paint had dried in the sun, baked into the wood grain. Every letter was an accusation, loud and permanent, and every silent glance from the homes downhill only twisted the knife further. No one came to ask if he was okay. No one knocked on his door. A woman walking her golden retriever crossed the street to avoid him. A teenage boy paused on his scooter, phone lifted, capturing a picture like it was roadside carnage. Even the sympathy was hollow. A man in a golf cap slowed his walk and muttered, "That's a shame," without breaking stride. Zane had never felt so unwelcome in a place his family had called home for nearly a century. But it didn't end there. The following Saturday, the HOA held an emergency meeting in the clubhouse, technically open to the public, but everyone knew who it was really about. Zane didn't attend. He didn't need to. The sound system carried Janet's voice loud enough up the hill that her words drifted through his open windows like poison. "A blight on the aesthetic integrity of our neighborhood," she declared. "It attracts, let's be honest, non-residents, strangers, hikers, people who don't respect the spirit of this community." She said it all with the smug elegance of a game show host, flawless makeup, pearls, and that same pageant smile she wore like armor. She moved through her speech with the confidence of someone who believed rules didn't apply to her. And maybe, so far, they hadn't. "Frankly," she said, "structures like that cabin belong in historical theme parks, not in front of homes where we raise our children." Applause followed, scattered but real. Zane stood on his porch and listened. He felt it down to his teeth. By Monday, printed flyers had started appearing in mailboxes. A vote was being drafted to amend the HOA's guidelines. The new language would extend aesthetic enforcement jurisdiction to homes within line of sight of subdivision entry points. A blatant move to bring Zane's property under their thumb. They weren't even pretending anymore. But what Janet didn't know, what no one on that committee suspected, was that Zane had already opened the drawer. It was cedar-lined, tucked into the base of a tall boy dresser built by his grandfather's own hands. Inside were yellowed photographs, hand-drawn sketches of the original cabin layout, and a cracked leather-bound journal filled with entries that dated back to 1931. His grandfather had written about the timber he hauled down from Estes Park himself, the riverstones laid by hand to form the chimney, the design influence of Appalachian craftsmanship brought west during the Depression. But the most important piece lay beneath the journal, a folded sheet of parchment brittle with age, but still legible. A copy of a 1942 filing with the Boulder County Surveyor's Office. A declaration of the structure's regionally significant architectural value, citing it as one of the last known examples of pre-war rustic homesteading in the region. Unfiled, forgotten, but not gone. Zane stared at the paper for a long time that night, lit only by the same lantern his grandfather had wired into the porch beams. He didn't feel anger yet, not fully. What he felt was colder, sharper, more focused. Because now it wasn't about the cabin anymore. It was about history. And history, unlike HOA bylaws, had weight. Zane didn't sleep. Not that first night, not the one after. Instead, he moved like a man on a mission, driven not by panic, but by purpose. He knew what he had, and more importantly, he knew what it could become. For 48 hours straight, he traced the paper trail of his grandfather's legacy, one dusty folder and brittle photo at a time. He started with the Boulder County Archives, navigating back rooms thick with decades of forgotten records. He flipped through maps with frayed edges and cursive notes scribbled in pencil. The clerk at the counter raised an eyebrow when he pulled out a 1942 property file and asked for a matching survey ledger. But after seeing Zane's urgency, she led him to the back shelves without another word. He found it all. The original tax filings, a newspaper clipping from 1947 that featured a photo of his grandfather building the chimney, pipe in his mouth, dog at his side, even a weathered nomination draft for a historical status that was written, "but for reasons unknown, never formally submitted. Then, he drove across 3 counties to meet with the Regional Historic Preservation Office. No appointment, no time to waste. There, he laid it all out: the journal, the photos, the county register, and perhaps most compelling of all, letters from retired architecture professors who had once studied his grandfather's work as part of a university field project. They cited the cabin's integrity of material, its authentic representation of Depression-era craftsmanship, and its value as a living artifact of Colorado's early settlement design. Zane didn't raise his voice. He didn't demand. He simply presented the truth, backed by evidence and history, and let it speak louder than Janet Langley ever could. But he wasn't done. That night, as wind brushed through the pines and the eyesore still screamed from his cabin wall, he made a call he'd been saving for the right moment. "Mia," he said, voice low but steady, "you still with the preservation office?" His cousin Mia hadn't just stayed with it. She'd risen. Now, deputy director of the State Office of Historic Preservation, Mia had both the authority and the institutional weight to finish what Zane had started. And more importantly, she knew the difference between petty neighborhood squabbles and legitimate cultural heritage. She listened. She asked questions. And then she said 4 words that changed everything. "I'll take it from here." By Thursday morning, the gravel drive in front of the cabin was no longer a place of quiet humiliation. It was now a designated protection site. Yellow rope stretched between wooden posts, marking the perimeter for survey teams. A temporary historical easel sign had been planted in the ground, announcing the cabin's nomination for official listing on the Colorado State Historic Register. The process was expedited under emergency review due to acts of recent vandalism against a structure of regional significance. When the press release hit the county newswire, the headline was simple: "Historic Foothills Cabin Gains Emergency Protection Status." And then, almost as if summoned by her own outrage, Janet Langley came roaring up the hill in her golf cart, her face already twisted into fury before she even hit the brakes. She stepped out, hands on hips, lips pulled tight. But instead of Zane, she was greeted by 2 state preservation officers in windbreakers, photographing the log joints and recording measurements with quiet professionalism. They didn't look up when she started questioning them. They didn't need to. Because now the cabin wasn't just Zane's. It belonged to the history of the state. And Janet? She'd just vandalized a protected landmark. Janet Langley was nothing if not consistent. Even cornered, even surrounded by yellow rope and preservation officers with state credentials, she couldn't resist the urge to spin the story. The next day, at a community meeting, she spoke with carefully measured outrage. Feigned confusion painted across her features like stage makeup. "It must have been teenagers," she insisted. "Some local kids trying to stir up trouble. I've always said we need more surveillance around here." She glanced around the room for nods of agreement, but found mostly stiff silence. A few people exchanged uneasy glances. One woman quietly folded the HOA flyer in her lap. Another suddenly remembered something in her purse that needed urgent inspection. Janet didn't know yet that the real surveillance had already done its job. 2 motion-activated trail cameras mounted discreetly beneath the cabin's eaves. Zane had installed them months ago to monitor wildlife. But that week, they captured something else entirely. A woman in a coral windbreaker, her face fully visible, holding a red spray can and writing "Eyesore" in deliberate strokes, pausing only to shake the can between lines. The timestamp was clear. So was the identity of the perpetrator. Zane didn't need to confront her. He simply handed the footage to the county sheriff. From there, things unfolded with quiet inevitability. Janet was formally charged with trespassing, vandalism of a registered heritage site, and defamation. The HOA's board, suddenly less eager to protect its once proud enforcer, announced that her actions had been individual and unauthorized. Their insurance declined to defend her. Legal costs mounted quickly. The committee issued a brief statement. Janet Langley would be stepping away indefinitely for personal health reasons. And just like that, The woman who had once strutted the subdivision with a clipboard and a self-righteous mission was gone. Meanwhile, the cabin transformed. The historical designation brought attention Zane never asked for, but quietly welcomed. Local school buses began parking along the gravel road every other Friday. Teachers led fourth graders past the old chimney and spoke of frontier resilience and Depression-era craftsmanship. Zane gave tours when asked, never charging a dime. He told them about his grandfather's hands, the stones from the riverbed, the years it took to build something that lasted. A preservation grant arrived to fund restoration of the damaged wood. Artisans were flown in from Durango and Glenwood Springs. The red paint couldn't be entirely removed. It had soaked too deep, but it was glazed and sealed, now part of the official exhibit. The word was still there, ghost-like beneath the lacquer. But now it had context. Now it had meaning. A Sunday newspaper ran a feature titled, "How a Cabin Survived Karen, a Landmark's Unlikely Champion." There was a photo of Zane standing in front of the porch, arms folded, the wind stirring his flannel, a quiet defiance in his eyes. As for Janet, she still lived in the subdivision. She still took her golf cart for rides, but now, every time she drove past Zane's cabin, she had to see it. The historical marker gleaming in the sun, the guided tour signs, the field trip calendars posted near the mailbox, and that faint, fading red spray paint, her own angry scrawl, preserved forever, like an artifact of petty spite defeated by legacy. Because some homes aren't just shelters, they're stories, and stories, once protected, don't answer to HOA rules. They outlive them.